Everybody smile.
I see the red light on my side, so I think we're good.
I see it too.
See it.
Yep.
All right, so each week we're gonna start out this study with a spiritual practice called Lectio Divina, which kind of literally translates to divine reading. And I like to understand it and practice it as almost a form of prayer. So I think it's helpful as we're preparing for this, kind of prepare yourself like you would for prayer. And this week we are going to use Matthew chapter 5, verses 43 and 48. So anyone who has their Bible, if they'd like to open that, they can. And we are going to request 2 volunteers to read through this passage. After the first time it's read through, we'll have a moment of sharing where we're going to share with everyone if there's a phrase or a word that sticks out to us. And again, it can be any sort of urging on that you feel. You know, it doesn't need to be anything deeply profound or anything. It's just any word or phrase that sticks out to you, and we'll go around and share that. Now, it is a little bit kind of complex in that we are doing this on Zoom. So we're gonna just have everyone who wants to share raise their hand, and the person who has shared last will put their hand down after they've shared, and then they can pick someone whose hand is raised, and we'll kind of go through that, and hopefully that will bring us through. If you're not familiar with someone's face or can't make them out, if you just scroll your mouse over someone's picture, it should show their name if it's not rendered right now. So that should help you. And then after the second time, well, after the sharing part, then we'll have a second reader, someone who's different, read the verse. And again, open ourselves to the urging of the Spirit here. And at the end of that, anyone who would like to share can ask for a prayer that they would like for themselves, that later in the end, we will, the person who's closing this will think of that and potentially include them in that prayer. Sometimes in this practice, we actually transition out of the Lectio Divina practice with a group prayer, but we thought that it could be a little too difficult with Zoom just to kind of keep that going and to figure out who is who. So we're giving this a go. We look at this as kind of an iterative process where we're hopefully going to improve it over time. So Matthew chapter 5, verses 43 through 48. Is there anyone who would like to be our first reader?
Sure.
Great.
Okay. Can you all hear me?
Who is it?
Yes.
Vicky.
Vicky, I'm sorry. My name says Red, but that's the computer name for me. So sorry. Okay.
Thank you, Vicky.
You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemies, and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect.
Thank you, Vicky.
So where are we? Oh, here.
Now we come to the time where if anyone would just like to briefly, you don't need to go too much into it, but just share a word or a phrase that stands out, please raise your hand and we can go around and give it a shot.
I'll go, Greg. My name
All
is
right.
Ellen, and I'm
Yep.
from Shelter Island, and I appreciate you all allowing me or for being here tonight. So the first word that popped out is perfect.
Thank you, Ellen.
Because I try to be perfect, and I can't do it on my own. So, is that what you're looking for, Greg?
That is perfect.
Perfect.
No pun intended.
Oh, thank you. Let's see, hands. I'll pick Karen.
Thanks. I thought, it rains on the evil and on the good, and the sun rises on the evil and the good. That takes away a lot of our tendencies toward judging. Who's next? Mike?
Took mine.
Did you
So
do that?
yes, that was mine also. It's the sun shines on the good and the bad, and the rain falls on the righteous and the unrighteous. And considering I've been having a hard time judging lately, and that helps me remember to not. Oh, I'm next. Okay, so I need to, I saw somebody else's hands was up. Bill?
Yeah. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Like the word pray just popped out.
Thanks, Bill.
Oh, I can't, let's say. Everybody that I can see is Vicky again.
The same for me, Bill, with love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Because in this time we're living in, people are judgmental and people are angry and people are reacting that way. And I've always told my children to be a follower of Christ. It's not an easy job. We're called to be more than we think we are or more than we think we can be, but we never do it on our own. Right. Anybody else? Greg?
Yeah, I'll go. So for me, like Ellen, perfect stuck out to me. And it was really the two perfects, both the perfection of our Heavenly Father and then this calling to be perfect, which seems really difficult. So. Does anyone else want to share?
I think Marion had her hand up. Is that right? Marion?
Great, Marion.
Don't forget to unmute yourself.
Okay, yeah, I'm trying to follow all of this. My Bible is quite old, and on verse 46, it comes down to the word publicans, and I kind of lost the interpretation there. I think I'm gonna have to get a newer version, just not making as much sense with
Is
the
that
version
instead
that
of
I have.
tax? Maybe
Yeah,
that's a
that's-
word tax collector.
Relocate me, William. What are we?
Verse 46, it says, "For if ye love them which love you, what reward have ye? Do
What?
not even the publicans the same."
Tax collector.
That's what I thought it meant. I don't like this version. I'm gonna have to find something else.
Can somebody give me the actual location so I can see
Yes,
if I can
it's,
find it? I missed something
Yeah.
on the beginning.
Oh,
yeah,
Matthew
sorry about that.
5,
Yep.
verse
Matthew 5,
46.
Matthew
Matthew
5,
5,
what?
verse 46.
Oh, all right, okay. I'm in 26, that's not good. I'm close.
Would anyone else like to share?
I will.
Adrian,
Actually,
actually, it wasn't my turn to call on him. Mary Ann's gonna,
is that all right?
Okay, go ahead, Adrian.
I think when I read here, verse 46, if you love those who love you, what reward have you? Because that's very easy. And it's not easy to love those who you feel hate you or persecute you. And it's really not easy to love those who love you. That's what I can add.
thank you.
And to love our enemies, that is not easy. We all have different thinking, but we're all children of God, and we should love everyone.
Does Doris want to share potentially? Not to put you on the spot, we just can't see
No,
you.
I could. Now I lost where it was.
So we're on Matthew 5.
Yeah, I'm
43
there.
through
I'm
48.
okay. Okay, pray for those who persecute you. I was going to do the pray thing. Because that's hard to do. To pray for those who persecute you, and yet if you do pray for them, it like gets a load off of you because you're giving it over to God. So. I'm done.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a word or phrase? All righty. Does anyone else want to read it the second time?
I will.
Thanks, Adrian.
43. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor, and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Good to those who hate you. And pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and he sends rain on the just and on the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward have you? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet your brethren only, what do you do more than others? Do not even the tax collectors do so? Therefore, you shall be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect.
Thank you. Does anyone have a prayer request that they would like to share with the group? Karen, did you have your hand raised?
Oh, I didn't realize. I thought we were commenting on the scripture. I'm screwed up.
We can also, as we're working our way through this, maybe even either a prayer request or something to share, just to make it a little more open.
I was just thinking that it used to be that you could hate your enemy in the Old Testament, and now it seems like Jesus is changing that.
Yeah.
And making that new covenant that you're not going to do an eye for an eye anymore.
Yeah.
So I think this is Matthew hearkening back to the old ways and Jesus's new ways.
It's hard though, right?
To be perfect, yes, it is.
Well, you have to be careful about getting hung up on the word perfect.
Right.
my cheat sheet on it says complete, which is a little bit, has the same meaning, but not quite, it doesn't flag it out that much. Complete.
Yeah, that is a helpful clarification.
But don't we
Does anyone-
always say, I'm not perfect? Don't we have a habit of saying
Yeah.
that?
Well, we're not perfect, we're forgiven.
Yeah.
Do I call on Greg?
I have my hand up. I would say for me, you know, this is as much a prayer request as it is something that's really sticking out to me is, you know, love your enemies. You know, I think, you know, I know personally it's easy to get, you know, angry and, you know, maybe not as loving as I should be to people that, you know, I find difficult. So, you know, I think we all need help, and I know I need help. So that would be my prayer request, and also something that sticks out. Does anyone else have anything that's sticking out or they'd like a prayer request on?
Yeah, Greg, I'll say something. Just listening to what you just said about loving your enemies. It's not easy to do, especially when you know they're doing things maybe behind your back or sometimes even in front of you. I've even gone and prayed about them, you know, prayed for them. And sometimes, you know, I don't see the results right away. But one suggestion is keep praying, because you will get past it. So.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if no one else has anything, I think on our timeline we're moving to the end of this. So.
They had a quick one.
Yeah, Bill. Sorry, I didn't see you.
Okay, Paul goes a little bit further in Romans chapter 12, which is called A New Life in Christ, the marks of a Christian. Let love be genuine, hate what is evil, hold fast what is good. Love one another with mutual affection, and outdo one another in showing honor. He really is talking about doing the whole thing for yourself, not for yourself, but concentrating on self first, and then
Others.
showing love to others.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. Thank you. All right, now I think we're gonna move on to Pete's section, right?
That's right. Thanks, Greg. And before I go further, can I politely ask everybody to mute themselves, and then you can unmute when you want to speak. That'll cut down on the background noise.
Yeah, so I hear a radio or something going.
You probably won't in a moment or two. Yeah, and to Bill's point about Romans 12, I've often called that passage the vision statement for the Christian. It's a really good passage. All right. So hopefully everybody got a chance to access the 3 resources that we attached to the email reminder. They're going to be up forever, so you can always go back and grab them if you didn't. And all you need for tonight, and even for the beginning, is I forget what we labeled it on the email, but I think it's called like Introduction to the Gospel of Matthew. It's a 1-page document. Hopefully you got a chance to look at that. And the title of our Bible study is a little bit misleading, only because we're going to get to Matthew 25, but we're going to be crossing across most of the gospel, with the culmination in Matthew 25, because of the 3 parables in Matthew 25, 2 of them are exclusive to Matthew, specifically the basis for a Matthew 25 congregation, the parable of the sheep and the goats. But tonight we're going to do a basic background on what we're going to be covering and dig into a couple things, and hopefully have some nice dialogue and conversation and discussion. First of all, so basically, the writer of the Gospel of Matthew thought of Jesus as a kind of new Moses. The baby Moses, you remember, was hidden from Pharaoh, and Jesus was hidden from Herod. Moses came out of Egypt, and if you remember Matthew, who's the only one to tell us about the wise people, Jesus came out of Egypt as well. Moses wanders in the wilderness. Well, Jesus is tempted in the wilderness and desert also. Another similarity, from Mount Sinai, Moses delivers the law, the Decalogue, or the Ten Commandments. From another mountain, Jesus delivers the Sermon on the Mount, which we're going to talk about tonight. The first 5 books of the Old Testament, we should give everybody a pop quiz. What are the first 5 books of the Old Testament? But we won't do that. It's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, right? They're the first 5 books of the Hebrew Scriptures. They're called the Torah, the books of the law. They are attributed to Moses. And much like the book of the Psalms, one way to look at Matthew is to see that there are 5 distinct discourses in Matthew's gospel. That Matthew grouped Jesus's teachings into 5 discourses, kind of like the new law for this fledgling group called Christians. Continuing with the similarities, after the resurrection, Jesus gives the Great Commission from a Mount Sinai-like mountain. And that commission, as Matthew reports it, is not to preach the gospel to all nations, telling them the good news. It is for teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you, i.e., the new law. You begin to see some of Matthew's intentions when you look at the book from this perspective. And looking at the book from the perspective of the 5 discourses, which I'll get into in a moment, we have to make clear that it's a lens. And if you dig into the biblical scholars about this, there's a little bit of back and forth about whether it's really accurate to look at the book as 5 discourses with a prologue and a finish, or actually what the 5 discourses actually are. Nevertheless, for the purposes of our study, for a great introduction to the book, we think that looking at the 5 discourses is a really good way to wrap our heads around it. So that's what we're going to do. For those of you who are taking notes, as we go through the study tonight and then the next 3 sessions, there are three foundations that come out when we look at Matthew, when we learn about the gospel and what Matthew is trying to accomplish. The first one is Matthew is often called the teaching gospel more than any of the other ones. It's a gospel written for a fledgling group of Christians, mostly a combination of Jewish Christians, that is Hebrews who were practicing the Jewish law, but then converted to Christianity, as well as Gentile Christians or Greek Christians who might have been any number of things, polytheists, pagans, influenced by Greek culture. That's the early church that Matthew is writing to. And we'll see some evidence of that as we go through the series. Jesus is portrayed as the new Moses, reinterpreting and giving new nuances to the Gentiles of the law and the Jews. And if you flip in Matthew to, let's try chapter 1, verse 23. Matthew chapter 1, verse 23. I'm going to go there myself. Matthew 1, verse 23. And Anybody want to volunteer to read it? I'll look for hands. Okay, Ellen Gove, don't forget to unmute yourself.
Oh, thank you. Behold, the virgin shall be with child and shall bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which translated means God with us.
Okay, now back up and read verse 22.
Now all this took place that what was spoken by the Lord through the prophet might be fulfilled, saying.
Very good. So you can find at least 10 references prefaced by the phrase, all this took place to fulfill what had been spoken. Matthew takes pains to connect the Jesus event, if you will, this new faith and the Jesus who is the Christ, to what was said in the Hebrew scriptures and in the Jewish traditions. Just one more example. Go to chapter 2, verse 6. Matthew 2, verse 6. And I won't be tricky this time. Actually, we're going to read Matthew 2, verse 5 and 6, so we can see the buildup. Anybody want to read that quick?
I will.
Thanks.
They told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet, and you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel.
Very good. The prophet, that's the prophetic tradition that Matthew wants to see that Jesus is directly connected to. And then just one more, if you go further in chapter 2 to verse 15, chapter 2, verse 15. I'll just do that one, just to hammer this point home. Anybody want to read that one real quick? Matthew 2:15.
Well, and was there until the death of Herod. Well, it's kind of the middle of a sentence.
That's fine.
When he arose, he took the young child and his mother by night and departed for Egypt, and was there until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the Lord through the prophet, saying, out of Egypt I called my son.
And thank you, Adrian. There are at least 7 other instances where Matthew uses the phrase fulfillment of what had been spoken to connect Jesus and the events of his life with the prophetic tradition and the major prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah. So we've got a gospel written by and to a fledgling congregation. It's a teaching gospel. Jesus is the new Moses, reinterpreting the Hebrew laws. And we see that Matthew wants us to understand that everything that happened with Jesus was for the fulfillment of what had been spoken, to tie with the Hebrew scriptures and the Hebrew traditions. Lastly, Matthew is a gospel, and we will see this, who is a gospel about an ethical crisis. There is a crisis of choice that is facing you that has imminent consequences and eternal consequences. And of all the gospels, Matthew is the strongest about that. Choose now and choose wisely, or you will face the consequences here and later. So those are the overarching themes in Matthew. Oh, by the way, if anybody has a question, just raise your hand. And if one of you sees a hand go up and I keep blathering on, just get my attention and tell me somebody wants to ask a question, okay? All right. So you don't have to memorize this. We're going to provide this every time, but I just want to give you the parameters, if you will, the scriptural references to the 5 discourses that we're going to go through. Discourse 1 consists of chapters 5, 6, and 7. Discourse 2 consists of chapter 10, verse 5, all the way to chapter 11, verse 1. Discourse
Say it
3, yes?
Say it again?
Discourse 2 is
Yeah.
chapter 10, verse 5
Okay,
through 11, verse 1.
okay, thank you.
Discourse 3 is chapter 13. Discourse 4 is chapter 18, verse 1 until 19, verse 1. And then discourse 5 is chapter 24, verse 3 through chapter 26, verse 1. And each session, we're going to cover at least, well, we're going to try to cover at least 2 discourses, but tonight's a good example that when we dig in a little bit, we're really going to be digging in on discourse 1. But if you've read discourse 2, we can go into that if you have questions or anything you want to share. So let's just look at these parameters quickly and notice some things about how they start and how they finish. Let's go to Matthew 5, verse 1 through 3. Matthew 5, 1 through 3, if you will. And whenever you're there, anybody want to read that quick?
I'll read it.
Okay.
When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up to the mountain. And after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven."
Okay, that's the beginning of discourse 1. Now let's notice how discourse 1 ends. And let's go to chapter 7, verse 28. Chapter 7, verse 28.
I'll read it. Now, when Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were astonished at his teaching. Do you want me to keep going?
Yeah, we'll do 29.
For he taught them as one having authority and not as their scribes.
Okay. Now let's take a look at how the discourse 2 begins and ends. Let's go to chapter 10, verse 5. Chapter 10, verse 5.
Okay,
So read that quick.
I'll read it. I'll read it.
5 and 6 too. Sorry.
These 12 Jesus sent out with the following instructions. Go nowhere among the Gentiles and enter no town of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel.
There again, we have a reference to the Hebrew traditions and the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So discourse 1 is usually called the Sermon on the Mount. That's kind of the centerpiece. Discourse 2 is titled Mission Instructions for Disciples. So as this one continues, we see those mission instructions taking place. Let's go to the end of discourse 2. That will be chapter 11, verse 1. Chapter 11, verse 1.
I'll read that, Peter.
Thank you.
And when Jesus had finished instructing his 12 disciples, he went on from there to teach and preach in their cities.
The end. So he was giving instructions to his 12 disciples, and he went on from there. So that's how discourse 2 ends. Now let's see how discourse 3 starts. And for that, we go to chapter 13, verses 1 through 3. Anybody want to read chapter 13, 1 through 3 real quick?
I'll read it, Peter.
Thank you.
That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea, and great crowds gathered about him, so that he got into a boat and sat there, and the whole crowd stood on the beach. And he told them many things in parables, saying, a sower went out to sow.
Very good. So the title usually given to discourse number 3 is parables, because chapter 13 is chock full of pretty much nothing but parables and some interpretation of those parables. So let's go to the end of Discourse 3. That'll be found chapter 13, verse 53. Chapter 13, verse 53.
I'll read it. When Jesus had finished these parables, he left that place.
Boom. Finished the parables. He left that place. Went home where he was rejected. Okay. So Discourse 4 starts at chapter 18. Let's go to chapter 18:1. Whoever would like to read that. Vicky?
At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?"
Okay, so the title often given to Discourse 4 is Teachings about the Church. And so you see how chapter 18 is full of all kinds of ethical teachings to the church. And it starts with this one. Let's see how it ends. That'll go to chapter 19, verse 1.
I'll read it, Peter, if you want.
Thank you.
Now, when Jesus had finished these sayings, he went away from Galilee and entered the region of Judea beyond the Jordan.
Okay, so you see clear parameters for the beginnings and endings of these discourses. They don't necessarily follow chapters and verse because the chapters and verses were added later to the Greek and Aramaic manuscripts. So that's why it seems to go throughout 18 to 19, verse 1. Okay, last one, Discourse 5 starts at chapter 24, verse 3. Chapter 24, verse 3. Who'd like to read that? Chapter 24, verse 3.
I can read it.
Thank you.
When he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will this be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?"
Okay, so right away, we have a very clear hint on what an appropriate title for the Discourse 5 might be. And it's usually called the final judgment. At this time in the life of Judaism, also in the life of secular Greeks in the area, it was widely believed that history was going to come to some cataclysmic end. So this was not just unique to the disciples. It was a kind of a cultural phenomenon. Everybody was trying to predict when the world was going to end and how it was going to end. So it was natural for that question to come up. And so the fifth discourse deals with the last judgment or the final judgment. And the word apocalypse in Greek actually means revelation. So that's why the last book of the New Testament is called Revelation. In Greek, it's apocalypto. So let's go to the end of Discourse 5, which can be found in chapter 26, verse 1. Chapter 26, verse 1.
I could read that.
Thank you.
When Jesus had finished all these words, he said to his disciples,
Boom. And then he goes into describing what is about to take place, and he's on his way to the cross. So that's the end of Discourse 5. And of course, it's telling and notable that the last parable that he tells at the end of Discourse 5, the way Matthew put his gospel together, is the parable of the sheep and the goats, 31 to 46, which forms the basis for our Matthew 25 movement. Okay, so that's the parameters of the 5 discourses. And tonight we're trying to cover at least Discourse 1. Maybe just, does anybody have any questions so far? Any observations?
Yeah, why is it called a discourse? Like, what does that mean, actually?
Teaching.
Okay.
Exposition.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so in Discourse 1, which consists of chapters 5 through 7, I just want to pull out a couple interesting items to help us understand more of Matthew's intent and what distinguishes Matthew from the other gospel writers. Let's go to chapter 5, 17 through 20. Chapter 5, 17 through 20. Chapter 5, 17 through 20. Anybody want to read that? I'm looking
I'll
for
read
it.
Bill.
Thank you. Which Bill's reading?
Bill Thompson, you got that?
I can.
Thank you.
Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill. Any more?
Yeah, maybe one more verse.
But truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass from the law until all is accomplished.
Very good. So again, this verse is exclusive to Matthew. You don't find it in Mark or Luke or John. Luke uses something like, it is easier for heaven and earth to pass away than for one dot of the law to become void, but not this whole message about Jesus clarifying that he did not come to abolish the law and the prophets, but to fulfill them. So again, there's that heavy emphasis on bringing the whole Jewish prophetic tradition along with him and reinterpreting it and transforming it, because he is the Messiah. And he's just saying that whoever relaxes one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do so shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. Bill.
Why then do so many people say that Jesus did come to abolish the law?
Well, that gets into the whole debate in the churches that Paul founded, where the new Gentile Christians and the Jewish Christians debated about how much attention must be paid to fulfilling the law when one becomes a Christian. And specifically, it all heated up around the requirement for circumcision. So that was a big problem in a lot of the early churches around Asia Minor. Like we see it in Galatians, we hear it in Philippians. The Jewish Christians were nicknamed Judaizers because they wanted the new Gentile Christians to go through all of the Hebrew law requirements in addition to taking Jesus as their savior. And the Gentile Christians were labeled licentiousness because they didn't think they needed all that law that Jesus represented, being saved by grace through faith. And so they had this tug of war between them.
But even today, there are people who say that.
Yeah.
Jesus came to abolish the law.
Right.
The Old Testament is basically saying the Old Testament is no good.
Yeah. And that's a heresy. To put it succinctly.
No, they're faulting the Old Testament and saying
right.
The Old Testament is really bad.
Since at least the second century, there were people who were saying that the Hebrew scriptures were now null and void, and shouldn't be considered, and that was declared a heresy by the Council of Chalcedon in 351. Okay, let's see. I think I might be running out of time. I'm going to look to my other fellow people, right? Okay, so I got to stop there. Darn it. But Karen's going to get us deeper into at least the Discourse 1 and all the good material that's in there.
Great, thank you so much. I never knew about the 5 discourses until we started prepping for this, so this is fantastic.
Good.
Okay, so this Sermon on the Mount, chapters 5, 6, and 7, we get so many of the verses that we all know by heart, the Beatitudes, turn the other cheek, the Our Father, the Lord's Prayer rather, and the knock and it shall be open to you. Do not store up treasure for yourself on earth. This is just a whole new way to think about living. It's so humble. It's so different from, get yours or come out on top, and even radical to read today. So as we think about going through Lent, I just want to kind of open it up for discussion about how some of the themes in this Sermon on the Mount resonate with you in your own life as you think about the things that we think about in Lent: wilderness travel, sacrificial love given freely, and atonement and reconciliation. So I guess I'd just open it up to what is your favorite verse or line from anywhere in chapters 5, 6, and 7? Something that resonates with you. I'll start us off. The one that gets me is in chapter 6, verse 25. Actually, it's 27. Can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your span of life? And as someone who worries all the time, this one really works for me.
Amen. I'm right there with you.
Those 3 a.m., wide awake. So if anyone would like to raise a hand and say something in these 3 chapters that really sticks out for them at Lent or any time in their journey.
Karen, just to add to yours, I go to the next part of the verse: strive first for the kingdom of God, and all these things will be given unto you.
Right. That's beautiful. Sue.
One that I like is just a little further past you is in chapter 7, ask and it will be given to you, and seek. That whole phrase, that grouping in there, is a favorite of mine.
For everyone who knocks, the door will be opened, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else have something that they like in the Beatitudes or anywhere else in this? Mike?
In let's see, 7 verse 12, and everything do to others as you would have them do to you, for this is the law and the prophets. And I always, from early on having children, we always talked about that. And, at least we told them that. And it was also something that was very poignant for me and Mary. Like, you gotta, if you want to treat somebody nice, you have to treat somebody nice if you want to get treated nice as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that's always been a thing to teach the children. Like, you want to be, you got to be nice to people, basically, the golden rule.
Right. Greg.
I really like chapter 6, verses 7 and 8. When you are praying, do not heap up empty phrases as the Gentiles do, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask. I guess just the comfort that God knows what we need before we ask. And as someone who likes words and can sometimes get stuck in just talking, it's nice to realize how we don't need to do that. It's not necessary.
That's great. Are there others that people really like or respond to? Yes. Mike.
Sorry, I also, Greg, I very much respond to that. And anybody that knows me, my prayers are often very short and concise. I try not to flower them up, and I just like to let's just talk to God, ask what you want, and then see you later.
Great. Peter.
Yeah, as I was getting ready for this study, I noticed the times that Jesus climbed up a mountain, and how Matthew gave that some prominence. And also I've been working on this week's sermon because this Sunday is Transfiguration Sunday, and Jesus climbs a mountain with Peter, James, and John. And what's coming to my mind or my heart is I love hiking, and I love a good, long, exhausting hike. And it kind of opens you to not just nature, but the spirit. And I just imagined the disciples, like, how long of a walk up that mountain did they take? And were they exhausted and thirsty? So like they sat down, and, were they open? Did he do that so that they would be available to this teaching? Because there's so many places where there's a mountain and they're going up the mountain, and it probably wasn't just a 5-minute walk. It was probably a nice long hike where it exhausted them, and it worked them out, and got them to sit down and be open to listen. So I like how this one starts. He sees the crowds, he goes up the mountain, and then he sits down.
Yeah. Anybody else? Ellen?
Yes, Karen. This whole 5, 6, and 7 years ago when I was in Bible studies, I mean, this was the best. And the cure for anxiety in chapter 6 is paramount for me. Verse 34, therefore do not be anxious for tomorrow will care for itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. And boy, I mean, I don't use that so much today because I have it in my mindset. It's in my routine that live each day, and tomorrow you'll deal with it tomorrow. But that carried me through a lot, that verse. And if I may, another one was, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. It is so good that today I can look for the good in everybody, because we all have good. And instead of going to because they don't agree with me or whatever, I really try to really look for the good in because it's there. Sometimes we have to dig a little deeper to see it or to find it, but it is there. So
it is. And thank you. That's a really nice segue to what are the more challenging parts of this Sermon on the Mount, as Ellen said, looking for that good in people. For me, the part in chapter 6 concerning treasures, verse 21, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And I mean, I think we think of ourselves as, being consistent in all things, but that's a real challenge. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So what are we doing with our treasure? Am I reflecting what I want to reflect with how I use my talents and my treasures? Are there other challenging verses for people?
Yeah, I back to the Beatitudes. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Well, with social media and all the other things flying around today, to seek the truth and get the truth is becoming increasingly difficult. So that's a challenge that I face every day.
Mm-hmm. Different narratives of what is truth and justice.
Right.
Greg.
Not to come off like the angry guy, but verse 22. But I say, I guess even go further back to 21 into 22. You have heard it said to those of ancient times, you shall not murder, and whoever murders shall be liable to judgment. But I say to you, if you are angry with your brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. And anger's easy, at least for me. It's kind of that knee-jerk reaction, and it doesn't necessarily lead to good things, and I think it's easy to tell ourselves that it's righteous anger, or that we're fighting for truth and justice, but it really it's got to come from a place of love, and not that angry place. So it's a struggle. It's hard.
Mhm. Yes. Mike.
So one that I find challenging, maybe because I don't understand it completely, is 7 verse 6. Do not give what is holy to dogs, and do not throw your pearls before swine, or they will trample them underfoot and turn and maul you. And I guess I put that under the lens of treat other people as you would be treated, and then but also then I get confused about this one, and that's something I need to think about a lot.
Yeah, who were the swine, Peter?
The dogs and the swine were the unclean, non-Jewish people. That's what's the kind of an aphorism for the people who are not clean, because remember the Jewish laws forbade eating of pork, so the swines were not kosher. So okay. That's where you see the connection to the Hebrew traditions and some of the debates that were going on for Matthew's time. It doesn't look, if it looks confusing, it is, because we're seeing a window into that moment for Matthew's church.
Thank you.
I think for me, I've always kind of expanded on that you kind of need to reach people where they are, and certain people need certain things, and just because you have something on your mind does not necessarily mean it's suited for what other people are going through at any one time.
Mm-hmm. Would anyone else like to share something that strikes them about these 3 chapters? Something that's personal to them? Yes, Vicki.
Well, I think what strikes me in all of these is that every part of our lives is covered as people. Our interactions with each other, how we view each other, treating each other, what we prioritize in our lives, whether that's physical treasures, or for some of us, myself included, as you said, is to worry tomorrow, the next day. It helps to keep us balanced. And in the end, in chapter 7, the hearers and the doers. In verse 24, we're not perfect, we won't do it perfectly, but if we can follow these words, we build a stronger foundation. And to me, that's encouraging.
It is. Yes, thank you. We're getting close to wrapping up. Are there any other thoughts that anyone would like to share? I'm supposed to ask you about the salt and the light in chapter 5. That's verses 13 to 16. I don't know if that, I know we have our program for the young kids called SALT. And any thoughts on being the light of the world or not hiding under a bushel? Mike.
We talk to our kids a lot about don't hide your light under a bushel when Mary asks them to sing or to do something for church. And she says, you've been given a gift and you need to share it. You have a light, don't put it under the bushel. And they're like, yeah, but I don't want to do it because so we live this one almost daily. And I do think also, and in a more serious note, that is something that's a call for us for all of us, even here in these meetings, these, the Zoom meetings, or when we get back to in person, that it's not that it's incumbent upon you, but everyone in this room here has something valuable to share, and we can all learn something from it. So please don't be afraid to share it, even if you think it's foolish or non-relevant. And so that's my takeaway from that one.
Well said. Nicely done. And with that, Mike is going to close us out with readings for next time and a prayer to end the evening.
Unmute. Okay, so now that we have a good idea of the discourses and what that means, and how they're related to different chapters and verses in the book, the next session for the third and fourth discourses, we're going to do the weeds and the wheat. Oh, sorry. Chapter 13, the whole chapter 13, which is third, and chapter 18, verse 1 to chapter 19, verse 1, which is the fourth discourse. And then there's a sermon by the Reverend Fred Craddock called The Weeds and the Wheat, which I believe you should either have gotten or will get in an email for the next session. And now, a question for you to ponder for next week. Which do you think is easier, to offer or to receive forgiveness? Which is easier, to offer or to receive forgiveness? I know. Good thing we have a whole week to think about it.
Easier. Wait.
Okay, so do you all have that?
No.
Matthew chapter 13 and Matthew chapter 18, verse 1 to 19, verse 1, and The Weeds and the Wheat by Reverend Fred Craddock. So now, if you will, I know I said like 5 minutes ago, I like to keep prayers brief, but we've got some fair amount of mileage to cover on this one. So let's please assume a prayerful position. And I would like to start off, dear Lord, by asking for Greg to have help with loving enemies and challenges in that purview. Same thing for Pete. And understanding that while the prayers are heard, the answers don't often come as quickly as we'd like, but that you're looking after them regardless of how we understand the outcome. And I'd like to put a prayer in for Bill Thompson, for just his concurrent struggles right now. And I'm going to also ask for your help in my house with the various COVID things that we've got going on. And I would also like to thank you for this time that we have together. And I would like to thank you for your word. And I pray that these words that we have read today will be written in our hearts, and that we'll be able to have them imprinted on our hearts as we go out into the world. I always wish that you guide us through our time apart following your word. And as you have told us during this particular time, to remember the prayer that you taught us.